morning, it's November 18th, and this is Two My Little Friends. And if you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button. Well, the elections are over, but the Democrats are still trying to wonder why they lost, and most of them missed the reasons. They're blaming Biden for not dropping out sooner. They're blaming Harris for running a pathetic campaign. It cannot be the policy and message because they still firmly believe they're right, and the people just don't understand why they should be embracing what Democrats stand for. But here are some of the facts that Democrats don't want to acknowledge. They spent the past 8 years plus demonizing Donald Trump. They called him every name in the book. But when the people were asked a basic question, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? The answer was a resounding no. The Democrats tried some version of lawfare, and they're charging Trump with as many crimes as they could muster, despite the fact that many of them had no merit. Their basic fallacy was their campaigning against Trump instead of telling the people of America what they could do if they were in power. The political lesson of the Trump era has been glaringly obvious since he came down that escalator 8 years ago. The system does not work for too many people, and those people want change. Instead of acknowledging this simple and clear fact with all the implications it entails, the American elites in the Democratic Party descended into a decade of insanity. Democrats refuse to acknowledge that people are upset about the economy, the waste, the corruption, and the wars. The anti-Trump coalition response to that includes policies that are going to look worse and worse with age. And here are some of them. Number one, the war on merit. Decision-making in academic admissions and even corporate hiring is now heavily weighted toward immutable characteristics like race, gender, and sexual preference instead of merit. It's not hyperbolic to say this leads to the end of America as we know it. This push for DEI in every facet of life turned off millions of voters. It was targeted to the liberal elites, the college-educated white vote that live in urban centers. How do you tell the guy that became a plumber and started his own business that his tax dollars have to pay the student loans for the kid that majored in some arcane major and that kid laughed at him in high school? They want people hired because they're qualified, not because of who they are. Number two, the Democrats engaged in a war on free speech. The government and corporate efforts to blame social media for Trump and therefore to regulate free speech, well, they're Orwellian. Google search is rigged in favor of left-wing results. Besides, X used to be Twitter, major social platform algorithms are rigged to suppress independent-minded speech. Well, in my opinion, that's just un-American. The fact that Twitter files showed government officials promoting this censorship takes it to the next level. Over and over, these social media platforms got caught rigging the results. Number three, breaking the immigration system completely and purposely. Democrats didn't realize what they were doing. It was already horrible and needed reform, but there is zero doubt that the people who raised their hands for open borders in the Democratic presidential debate purposely ended Trump policies to let in tens of millions of people with zero effective screening. They proposed a ridiculous immigration reform bill that got a few Republicans to support that bill, but would have continued to allow millions of illegal border crossings. The devastating impact of these policies on our economy, community, and security was borne most directly by lower-income Americans of every race. Number four, Joe Biden promised to be a unifier for the country, and he turned out to be the exact opposite. He divided the country by race, and his famous quote, "If you don't vote for me, you ain't black," showed his true colors. He insulted millions of voters by calling them garbage and using the term MAGA in a sneering and hateful manner. Number five, Democrats fully embraced extreme policies on transgender issues. We've all seen the stories about males who transgender themselves to be females and then beat up on girls in sporting events. How many females who trans to become males are trying to compete against men in sporting events? I think we all know the answer to that. And that fact alone should tell anyone how ludicrous it is to allow what the Democrats support to keep occurring. Finally, one Democrat, Seth Moulton, a congressman from Massachusetts, came out and said the obvious. He did not want his daughters competing against biological males. Well, what do you think the reaction was among Democrats? Well, it was as expected, calling for him to resign. They just don't get it. All these things started to resonate with the voting public. And when it came time to go to the ballot box, they wanted to send a signal to Democrats. Stop the foolishness. If you look at any election map, you see a sea of red surrounding blue urban centers. It highlights the disconnect the Democrats have with suburban and rural voters. Even states like California saw Republicans gaining in numbers and formerly blue counties turning pink to red. It has fostered a movement among those voters to try and separate themselves from state governments dominated by leftist Democrats from urban cities. The most entertaining part of the presidential election this month was the entertainers that flocked to endorse Kamala Harris. Somehow they must have thought they had a connection to the average American. Then it turns out that some of them were paid hefty sums to appear at Harris events. Now, we've all seen television ads where there's a disclaimer at the bottom stating that these commercials were paid actors. Perhaps those endorsements should have carried the same warning. When it's all said and done, Trump won and Harris and her fellow Democrats lost. If the Democrats keep going down the same policy path, they will keep on losing. So I cheer them on. Tell them go for it. Keep telling the people how dumb they are and lecture them, because obviously it's not working. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.